Hello there, and welcome back to another episode of Check with Tech, your guide to all things tech. I'm your host Yaseen Azzam, and let's get started, shall we? To start off, we have the announcement of the Redmi K30 Pro. Now, before I say anything about specs, let me just say that the design between the Redmi K30 and the K30 Pro is completely different from each other. You can't even tell that these are from the same lineup. What's different about these phones? Well, I think that the Redmi K30 Pro is a little bit more matte than the regular one, and the entire circle shape is now a camera cutout, and instead of a hole punch cutout on the regular K30, you have a pop-up selfie camera on the K30 Pro. Now, what does the phone actually have to offer? So it has a 6.67-inch 1080p AMOLED display with HDR10 Plus and 60 Hz. So already it's behind most of this year's flagships. But to make up for it, it does have a headphone jack. So we're good there. You have 4 cameras on the back, a 64 megapixel primary camera, a 30 megapixel ultra-wide camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 5 megapixel telephoto camera. It also has a 4700 mAh battery with a 33 watt charging brick in the box, IP53 water resistance, NFC, Wi-Fi 6, and 8K video recording. And Xiaomi claims that the K30 Pro has a much better haptic feedback system which is powered by a linear motor, which theoretically should fix one of the issues on the K20 Pro. Oh yeah, I should also mention that there's going to be a second version of the phone which replaces the 5 megapixel telephoto camera with one that can support 30 times hybrid zoom. So you have the K30 Pro and the K30 Pro Zoom. The K30 Pro will start at around $425 with 6 gigs of RAM and 128 gigs of storage, but you can max it out to 8 gigs of RAM, 256 gigs of storage, and the K30 Pro Zoom, and that's going to cost you $565. Now, in my opinion, you should completely remove the regular version, just keep the zoom, because even with the maxed out version, it's still cheaper than most flagships and it has almost the same performance. So if I was in charge, I would just scrap out the original version and keep the zoom variant, and I believe that will still be the same. Okay, now let's go to a phone that probably not many of you would know its existence or even the manufacturer's existence, and I wouldn't blame you. They're not really that well known. So the company is called 8848, and basically what they do is they sell smartwatches and phones that are very luxurious in their opinion, and yes, they're very expensive, but also they use a lot of good materials like gold and titanium and probably diamond, I'm not sure. So they just announced the teaser for their new phone, the Titanium M6, which will be unveiled on the 29th of March. And one of the only things we know about it is that it's going to have a 6.01 inch screen, which isn't big nowadays, in my opinion. It's going to be their first phone that has 5G, and that it's going to have the Snapdragon 865 with up to 12 gigs of RAM and 1 terabyte of internal storage. I wouldn't blame you if you've never heard of 8848 before, but they're really well known when it comes to luxury items, and they're actually one of the few manufacturers that take smartphones in a new, completely different level than what the others are doing. So far I can't tell you what the phone actually looks like because I don't even know what it looks like because it's still not fully announced yet. Okay, moving on completely to another topic. you have Apple Pay, you have Google Pay, you have Samsung Pay, and now you have OnePlus Pay. Yes. So we actually knew that this is going to be a thing last year because they announced it when they were announcing the OnePlus 7T series. And they said that they would unveil the platform this year. So no, they didn't announce it yet, but we do have reports of OnePlus Pay, the application that's available in China. Apparently, OnePlus Pay is active there. But since it's starting out, it still doesn't support any banks except a few exceptions. I mean, till now they only have the saving cards for Guangfa Bank, Misheng Bank, and SPDB, and the credit cards for Guangfa Bank and SPDB. So I really wouldn't be excited right now about it until I actually get to use it, which probably will be very far in the future. But it's still not announced, so I'm not sure how we got hold of this platform, and yeah, we're going to see when exactly OnePlus will be announcing them. Now here's some information that we just found out about the new iPad Pro, specifically about the SoC. So now we told you that the new iPad Pro has the A12Z Bionic chip. So here's a bit of a story about how it got made. Now the old version of the iPad Pro has the A12X, which actually has 8 cores for the GPU, but one of them is disabled. But the A12Z is exactly the same processor, but that extra core is enabled. So yeah, if you were looking for a serious jump in performance, don't expect that. Actually, I would... we all know that the new iPad Pro is just a refresh from the older version. I mean, both of them are really good. They're one of the best tablets that I ever know. But if you're simply getting the new iPad Pro just because of a big performance jump, I would advise to not do that. This is it, ladies and gentlemen, the main event. The Huawei P40, the Huawei P40 Pro, and the additional member, the Huawei P40 Pro Plus. Huawei couldn't think of another name, so they just put a plus in the name. So this was highly anticipated for two main reasons. One, how Huawei would try to survive without Google, and because this is the first big flagship without Google services. And two, camera upgrades. I mean, those were a trend for since the iPhone 11 Pro Max, and still continuing. So yeah, expect a camera upgrade and no Google services yet. Okay, what do all these three phones have in common? Well, they have the Kirin 990 chip, 5G, 90 Hz, and an in-screen fingerprint scanner, which is supposed to be 30% faster and 30% bigger. Okay, so I'm going to tell you the specs of each and every one of these three phones, starting from the base P40 all the way to the P40 Pro and then the P40 Pro Plus. Okay, let's start. The P40, what does it have? It has a 6.1-inch Flex OLED display, 3 cameras on the back, a 50 megapixel camera, a 16 megapixel ultra-wide camera, an 8 megapixel telephoto camera with 3x optical zoom, and with a color temperature sensor. Now on the front you have a 32 megapixel camera, and it comes with 128 gigs of storage with 8 gigs of RAM, a 3800 mAh battery with 22.5 watt fast charging, and comes in not 1, not 2, not 3, but 5 colors: black, deep blue sea, ice white, silver frost, and blush gold. Now for the P40 Pro, you have a 6.58-inch Flex OLED display and 4 cameras on the back: a 50 megapixel camera, a 40 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 12 megapixel 5x optical telephoto, and a 3D time of flight sensor, and a color temperature sensor. On the front, you have a 32 megapixel selfie camera with an added depth sensor. You have a 4200 milliamp hour battery with 40 watt fast charging, and it comes in the same colors as the base P40. Now to the P40 Pro Plus. It has the same thing, except it actually goes down in quality when it comes to the camera setup. You have a 50 megapixel camera, a 16 megapixel ultra-wide camera, an 8 megapixel telephoto camera with 3 times optical zoom, an 8 megapixel telephoto camera with 10 times optical zoom. Yes, that's 2 telephoto cameras. A time of flight sensor and a color temperature sensor. On the front, you have the exact same camera setup as the regular Pro. You have a 4200 mAh battery with 40 watts fast charging, and this time only 2 colors, ceramic black and ceramic white. That was a mouthful. I mean, it's not easy to describe the specs of 3 phones. Now, as expected, they don't have any Google services, so when it comes to Android, you get nothing except the services that Huawei themselves can provide, which we'll talk something about that later. But overall, about the design of the phone, on the back, it has one of the best colors I have ever seen on a phone. I think it was frosted silver. No, it was silver frost. Frosted silver, that's on the OnePlus 7T. But yeah, it's basically the perfect combination between shine and matte. I mean, you basically don't get any fingerprints, but you still get that shiny look, and it would just be a waste if you got something that covers the back of the phone. It's just better the way that it's manufactured. It looks so good that I wish every phone does the exact same thing. The P40 is going to cost around $880. The P40 Pro will start at around $1,100, and the Pro Plus will cost around $1,540. The base model and the Pro version will ship on April 7, and the Pro Plus will ship in June. So, in your opinion, is it useful? Well, to answer that, you need to answer one really big question. Do you need Google or not? I mean, you can sideload the apps, but it's not recommended because most of the time it's just clickbait, or you can catch some viruses and malware. But if you can live without Google, then I would say go for it. This is, on paper, a really great phone. But if you cannot live without Google, then find something else to replace your phone. It all depends on if you need Google or not. Now let's talk about something that I promised I would talk about, which is a new service that Huawei is providing in the new P40 series, Celia. Okay, so who is Celia? Well, Celia is Siri, but Huawei's version of it. Yes, Huawei is officially making its own voice assistant, which makes sense because Google with its Google Assistant is no longer working on the Huawei phones, so it does make sense for Huawei to make its own voice assistant. But Celia, that sounds familiar. Yes, I mean, if you can actually say it fast, it kind of sounds like Siri. Hey Celia. So I did a test to make sure that you couldn't say Celia without activating Siri, just like Marcus Brownlee did in his impressions video on the P40. So let me try that. Hey Celia.
Go ahead.
I mean, when you actually say it, I mean, most people will say that it sounds like Celia, but actually the iPhone thinks that I said Siri, but I didn't. But anyways, that's not important. What is important is that it will understand commands in English, French, and Spanish, and it's going to do what any voice assistant does, whether updates text, phone call requests, reminders, interacts, calendars, and translations. So yeah, overall, I think that it's a great idea for Huawei to do its own voice assistant, but the name thing, yeah, I don't think you should use Celia whenever you have an iPhone or an iPad next to you. And that is it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. Please make sure to listen to the other episodes and don't be afraid to leave a review on Apple Podcasts. As always, this is Yaseen Azzam signing out. See you next weekend.